Joining us now on the line from Vancouver, British Columbia, Andre Gerolymatos. He is the director of the Hellenic Studies Center at Fraser University. And Andre, it's good to have you back on the program. How are you tonight?
I'm very well, thank you.
We're going to take a kind of a Greek elections 101 approach off the top of our interview here to what's coming up this weekend. So I want us to just start by having you tell us who the leading contenders are for this weekend's elections.
Fundamentally, two parties, New Democracy, or Nea Demokratia, as they say it in Greek, and Syriza, which is the radical left-wing party. And that in itself is a coalition of smaller left-wing parties.
And if we assume that the European bailout issue is top of the ballot, how do their respective approaches differ?
Well, both parties would like to renegotiate the memorandum concerning, the measures that have been implemented, because they're extremely unpopular. The country is under tremendous strain. I mean, Greek society is fraying at the edges. The difference is that New Democracy will take a much softer approach, and Syriza will take a very hard approach. I mean, they're going to go to Europe, and they're going to demand radical changes in the memorandum.
Well, if they're both calling for a renegotiation of the EU deal, are they really that far apart, those two parties?
Fundamentally, no. It's just that I think the Europeans are more afraid of Syriza because it is a radical left-wing party. If you look at the fine print of what they're saying and what they're publishing, a lot of it is, of course, pre-election rhetoric. But basically, both parties are telling people, look, we're going to change this arrangement because obviously it's not working.
I'm going to, I hope anyway, appropriately characterize what the outside world, I think, sees as the two choices facing Greeks. Number one, painful austerity measures, but staying within the Eurozone. Option two, a very difficult, very painful exit from the Eurozone and a massive currency devaluation. I think that's how everyone else sees it. Is that how the Greeks see it?
Yes. I think they see it like that rationally, but I think people are not behaving rationally in Greece. If you look at the polls, 70–80% of people in Greece want to stay in the European Union, in the Eurozone, but they don't seem want to connect that they have to implement severe changes in the Greek economy in order to do so. However, they're also looking at Spain, and people again don't look at the fine details, and they're saying, hey, how come Spain got 100 billion euros without an austerity package? Of course, it's two different situations, but that doesn't come across to the ordinary citizen in Athens.
Two different situations, but when they hear the explanation, do they find it satisfactory?
No, they don't. There is a tremendous backlash against things German, and especially the president of Germany, Merkel, fairly or unfairly, she's been sort of demonized as the architect of the austerity measures.
I'm going to show you and our viewers this clip that has literally gone viral all over the world. We haven't seen anything like this on this side of the pond, but here was an excerpt, I know you know what's coming, from a Greek television program. Roll tape, please.
Yep.
Έτσι της είπα, συνεργαστήκανε, να δούμε τα πλάνα. Συνεργαστήκατε, δεν ασχολείσαι με παλιοκουμούνι, δεν ασχολείσαι με φασισταριά, αν είναι δυνατόν.
Δυστυχώς, πέρα από την κρίση της οικονομίας.
Τη ρωτήσανε, συνεργαστήκατε και απάντησε, κύριε Αναβολή, λόγω παρέλευσης ωραρίου. Ποιο είναι το πρόβλημα αυτό, κύριε Αναβολή? Με τους παλιορουφιάνους, που είναι μια ρουφιάνα από το κόμμα σου και μας σύρει δικαστήρια, κατηγορουμένους.
Πέρα από την κρίση της
Λοιπόν, ένα λεπτό, τέθηκε ένα θέμα προσωπικό και δεν επιτρέπω σε κανέναν.
Ξέρετε ποια είναι η κρίση δημοκρατίας?
Κυρία Δούρου, αναφερθήκατε σε ένα θέμα προσωπικό, μην μιλάτε γενικώς και εμφανίζονται σήμερα.
Οι οποίοι θα πάνε τη χώρα 500 χρόνια πίσω.
Άντε βρε νούμερο, θα πάμε 500 χρόνια πίσω τη χώρα.
Όχι.
You told us a moment ago, you said that much of Greece was in a not very logical state right now. One doesn't want to read too much into anything, but as you look at that clip, what do you think it says about the emotional state the country is in right now?
It's extremely fragile. There have been very heated debates on Greek television, a lot of yelling, a lot of arm waving, a lot of screaming even, but I've never seen a man assault a woman anywhere, in a public forum in Greece. It is a disgusting sight, but at the same time, I think it shows that Greek society is frayed at the edges. And the fact that this man vanished and the police couldn't find him, quote unquote. And then, he turns up and he's actually suing the two women that he assaulted, as well as the television station. Speaks volumes that this society is gone on a direction that no one could have anticipated a year ago.
That kind of scenario is not completely unheard of on some of the most outrageous American, cable television programs. But this was supposed to be a pretty legit centrist program in Greece, right? And therefore,
it is indeed.
pretty unusual?
Very much so. Antenna is a mainstream television station. It's equivalent to, Global or CTV or CBC here, although it's not a public broadcaster. And, Greek society is very conservative by its nature. I mean, the idea of a man hitting a woman is very, very far from what happens in Greece.
Greece, of course, has very bitter memories from World War II of Nazi Germany and its treatment thereof. This is obviously a very different Germany today, but I wonder whether that history is a template over which some of this debate is playing out.
It's a filter. I mean, it's spilling over into everything in the media, on public television, on private television. The war has come back in full force, the German occupation, the executions, the destruction of villages, and actually the impact of the war on Greece and the occupation. I mean, a lot of Greece's woes as a society, as an economy, the fact that it never really got out from under, have to do with World War II and also the Greek Civil War that happened right after the Second World War from 1946 to 1949. So you have to imagine that this country for a period of 8 years was completely, totally devastated, and it took a very long time to rebuild. And as it was rebuilding, of course, it was quietly falling into a lot of debt. And the ironies, of course, is that the Germans do owe the Greeks about 170 billion euros in reparations. Of course, it's too complicated to get into now, but this has come out in the forefront, and people are saying, well, if they owe us the money, why can't they pay us that? The Germans are saying, well, we did owe you the money, but not anymore. But even more to the point is that the Germans borrowed something like 30 billion equivalent today euros from the National Bank of Greece. And of course, this was not paid back. And, these are the issues that are being played out instead of course, talking about how can they restructure their economy, how can they move Greece forward, how can they eliminate the incredible civil service, which clogs everything. It's completely inefficient, These things are not happening. Instead, they're kind of turning inward and turning to the past.
Have you seen any evidence that the Germans are prepared to acknowledge any of that past debt due to Greece?
No, they deny it, and I think it's not a wise thing for them. It just adds more fuel to the fire. I think a small concession on that score, a diplomatic one, I think would go a long way in shifting the paradigm of the argument. It shouldn't be about the war. It shouldn't be about reparations. These things have their place in international courts and other such fora. The discussion should be about the Greek economy and what has gone wrong. And, in as much as, of course, the Greeks are almost refusing to understand what has gone wrong because of the poverty that has befallen on them. Most people have lost their jobs. There's unemployment of almost 30% for young people. People's income has dropped by 50%. Pensions have dropped by 80% in some cases. So they're absorbed with that. Ironically, German society is kind of going through a different sort of denial. Their politicians have not been telling their people the truth that, whatever Greece is and whatever Greece has done, a Greek exit from the euro is going to have a huge impact on Germany and German economic well-being. Can you imagine the euro falling down, collapsing? The German Deutschmark then will be replaced, will come in to replace the euro for Germany. German exports will become impossible and Germany will suffer.
You talked about that left-wing coalition that's contesting this weekend's election off the top, and I want to read you something that Thomas Wright wrote in foreignpolicy.com on that issue and then have you comment. Tsipras believes his trump card is that Greece is too big to fail. So, rather than touting a graceful way out of the euro, he wants the prospect of a Greek exit to be as horrific and contagious as possible, an economic cataclysm that would drag everyone else down as well. Essentially, he is arguing that Greece and Germany exist in a state of mutual assured destruction. Germany will never pull the plug on Greece, regardless of what it does, because the risk to itself is just too high. Do you think Tsipras has it right?
To a point. I think he has to be very careful not to push the envelope too far with the Germans. I think he has a valid point with respect to the austerity measures. The EU as an entity and Germany in particular have seen that these measures are not working. Greece is just falling into deeper debt. He will, if he wins the election, he will have some he will have a trump card to play, that he is the radical left, and the Europeans are going to be a little more afraid of him than the traditional parties. If he uses that skillfully, he might be able to get some modifications to the so-called memorandum of austerity measures. And of course, that would then play back, I think, very positively in Greece. But, you know, the gentleman who wrote that article, he's quite right. I mean, they are locked into a very deadly economic struggle. Greece goes, it's going to have an impact on Germany and Europe. And Tsipras will not want a smooth, quiet gentleman way out of Europe. He'll want it as messy as possible.
Now, it's an interesting analogy that Thomas Wright has used because, of course, mutually assured destruction refers to the Soviets and the Americans having, you know, thousands of nuclear missiles pointed at each other, and once the game is on, they're both utterly destroyed. I mean, is that, we're not playing with those stakes, obviously, with this, but is that the kind of mindset that's being brought to bear here?
That's the kind of mindset that's being brought to bear as pre-election rhetoric. I think, you know, all parties, and if we look at, for example, you know, the United States, what's going on, and the things that are being said by the Republicans and even by the Democrats, you know, politicians have kind of gone amok with pre-election engineering, and I don't think a lot of this rhetoric is going to tone down after the election.
So if this left-wing coalition does win, you know, those of us who are over here and trying to figure out what that portends, can we categorically conclude that if that left-wing coalition wins, Greece is that much closer to leaving the Eurozone and going back to the drachma?
I wouldn't say that. I think that Tsipras and Syriza, you know, again, people are not paying attention to a lot of the things that they're saying. They're paying attention to what some of the more extreme elements in their party or coalition are saying. He wants to stay in Europe. He wants to stay in the Eurozone. He just wants to renegotiate the austerity measures. And that's a big difference between that and saying, you know, as soon as these guys get elected, they're going to pull Greece out of the Eurozone. And the other thing that happens when a party gets elected, it becomes the government. It has to assume responsibility, and that in itself, of course, changes the way people talk and the things that they do.
Andre, as we know, it's rare for leaders of foreign countries to express an opinion publicly about how they hope elections turn out. But imagine yourself, if you would, right now, you know, in Paris or in Berlin. Who are they cheering for to win this election?
Oh, Mr. Samaras and New Democracy. I mean, they've subtly even tried to, you know, campaign for him, and that has backfired. I think they would have been better off to have campaigned for Tsipras, and so that, you know, people would not vote for him. So, you know, even Mr. Hollande's interview yesterday, you know, backfired. People are seeing foreign intervention in favor of New Democracy, and that is driving them to vote for Syriza. Really?
So Greeks would vote a way they might not intend to vote just to upset foreigners who are putting their opinions forward on their election. That's possible?
Yes, because they see it's these foreigners who are responsible for the pain that they're going through, right? It is these foreigners that have set up, you know, the austerity measures which are destroying the country. And a lot of economists, you know, Nobel Prize winning economists around the world and, you know, former finance ministers are saying these austerity measures are not going to work. You need a combination of austerity, restructuring, and of course growth. Because if the economy keeps shrinking, the debts will never be paid back. Ultimately, they will have to default.
Do you have a view on who you think would be better for Greece?
A guy named Venizelos, but he's been dead for, you know, close to 80 years, so that's not going to help. I think right now they're in a really deep hole, and I hope to be pleasantly surprised if Tsipras gets elected, and you know, and it would depend on the kind of people that he will have around him, and of course, and how he deals with the Europeans. Because right after his election, he has to go to an EU meeting about the Eurozone.
So that's your view. How about a prediction on who you think will win?
I think there's a very good chance that Syriza will win. Either they're going to form a majority government, a small majority, or they'll do it with a coalition of one or two smaller parties.
Andre, it's good of you to help us out with this most interesting election coming up in Greece this weekend. Thanks so much for being there for us on the line from Vancouver, BC.
You're very welcome. It's always a pleasure.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.